I used to think the ultimate betrayal was a late-night text. I was wrong. True betrayal starts with a calculation so cold it freezes your blood. When you discover the man you slept next to for 10 years is plotting to send you to prison and steal your life, you do not cry, you smile, make him a perfect cup of coffee, and build an invisible cell. Listen closely. The devil might just be your perfect husband. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continuous support, but unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep producing the content you love. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, much longer, and highly detailed true stories that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors, bringing the intense drama to life. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us dive into today's chilling tale, starting with the life of our main character, Mila Clark. I am Mila Clark, a 34-year-old chief architect at Novus Archways, a leading technology and architecture corporation. My life, or so I believed, was a meticulously drafted blueprint. Everything had its designated place. Everything was structurally sound. At the center of this perfect design was my husband, Julian. He was a highly successful investment consultant, the kind of man who always remembered our anniversary, who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday, and who seemed to anticipate my needs before I even voiced them. We had built a comfortable, enviable life together over the years. It was a flawless, beautiful facade. It was a completely ordinary Saturday afternoon, the kind of crisp, bright weekend day that makes you want to tackle home improvement projects together. We were at Apex Hardware, a massive, warehouse-style furniture and building materials superstore. The air smelled of cut pine sawdust, industrial floor cleaner, and the faint metallic tang of newly forged tools. I was pushing a heavy metal cart filled with ceramic tiles and premium grout, excitedly discussing the color palette for our upcoming bathroom renovation. Julian was walking right beside me, his hand resting warmly on the small of my back. He was nodding, smiling, and offering just the right amount of enthusiastic input. Then, his phone vibrated in his jacket. He pulled it from his pocket, his brow furrowing in a perfectly practiced expression of annoyance. He sighed heavily while looking at the screen. "It is the office," he said, his voice laced with manufactured regret. "They are having a massive meltdown over the Peterson account. You go ahead and check out. Honey, I need to take this. Just a few minutes." He kissed my cheek, a lingering, affectionate press of his lips, before turning and walking toward the quieter outdoor garden section. Holding his phone to his ear, I watched his broad shoulders retreat, feeling a fleeting pang of sympathy for him having to manage a work crisis on our weekend. I maneuvered my heavy cart toward the front of the massive store, joining a moderately long line at register number 4. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting a sterile, bright white glow over the home decor magazines and candy bars lining the checkout aisle. I was just reaching into my purse for my wallet when an older woman in a dark blue security uniform stepped directly into my line of sight. Her name tag read Martha. She had deep wrinkles around her eyes, etched from years of carefully observing people, and her expression was incredibly tense. She did not look like someone dealing with a routine shoplifter or a lost child. She looked like someone delivering a tragic death notice. She leaned in close, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "Ma'am, please come with me." I blinked, confusion washing over my face. I tried to offer a polite smile, assuming there was some simple mistake with my shopping cart, but Martha did not smile back. She gently but firmly touched my elbow, guiding me away from the busy register and toward a discreet, unmarked gray door near the customer service desk. The sudden shift from the bustling, noisy store floor to the cramped, dimly lit security office made my stomach churn with an inexplicable, creeping sense of dread. The room smelled of stale black coffee and electronic ozone. A large wall of monitors displayed various black and white angles of the store aisles and exits. Martha locked the heavy door behind us and gestured for me to sit in a worn leather desk chair. "I am so sorry to frighten you," Martha said, her voice steady but deeply sympathetic. "I have been working security here for 15 years. I notice things, I notice behaviors, and I have been watching your husband for the past 3 weeks." My heart began to hammer wildly against my ribs. Watching Julian why? Martha did not answer my question verbally. Instead, she reached over to a master control panel and typed a few keys. One of the large central monitors flickered, bringing up high-definition footage from the outdoor parking lot. The timestamp in the top right corner indicated it was live video, happening right at this exact moment. "Look," she instructed quietly. On the screen, I saw our silver sedan parked under a light pole, and there was Julian. He was not on his phone. He was not managing a work crisis. He was standing at the rear trunk of our car. I watched, completely paralyzed, as he pulled a small, silver key from his pocket. It was not his electronic car fob. It was a secretly copied physical key to the trunk. He popped the lid open and reached inside, pulling out my black leather work briefcase. My breath caught sharply in my throat. That briefcase contained my Novus Archways laptop. It held highly classified building blueprints, unreleased structural algorithms, and top-tier security data that I was strictly forbidden from leaving unattended. Julian unzipped the bag with practiced, terrifying efficiency. He opened the laptop right there in the trunk, waiting just a few seconds for it to boot from sleep mode. Then, he pulled a small, metallic USB flash drive from his inner jacket pocket and shoved it into the side port of my computer. The tiny blue reading light on the drive began to flash rapidly. He was copying my files, my entire life's work, my corporation's most heavily guarded secrets. The icy chill started in my fingertips and rushed straight to my heart, but the nightmare was not over yet. From the blind spot between a large white delivery truck and our car, a woman emerged. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, dressed in a sharp, expensive beige trench coat. She walked with supreme, arrogant confidence, stepping right up to Julian. He did not flinch in surprise. He simply pulled the drive from my laptop and handed it to her. She slipped the stolen data into her designer handbag. Then, she reached her hand up to his neck, and Julian leaned his head down. They kissed. It was not a passionate, sweeping romance novel kiss. It was quick, sharp, and brutally transactional. It was the kiss of two conspirators sealing a lucrative, devastating deal. She turned on her heel and walked away, quickly disappearing from the camera's view. Julian calmly closed my laptop, zipped the leather briefcase, locked the trunk, and began walking back toward the main store entrance, sliding his phone out to pretend he was just finishing his fake business conversation. I sat in that dark security room, absolutely frozen to the core. The air had been completely sucked from my lungs. The man I loved was having an affair, but the other woman was merely a symptom of a much deadlier disease. Julian was not just breaking my heart, he was actively stealing my intellectual property. He was committing federal corporate espionage, and he was using me as his unsuspecting vault. The perfect, loving husband was nothing but an empty mask, hiding a calculated predator who was actively dismantling my life, piece by piece. I thanked Martha, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger echoing from a great distance. I left the heavy cart of ceramic tiles behind in the security office and walked out through the automatic sliding glass doors into the vast parking lot. The afternoon sun was still shining brightly, but I felt nothing but a hollow, biting cold seeping into my bones. Julian was leaning casually against the passenger side of our silver sedan, idly swiping on his smartphone. When he looked up and saw me approaching, his handsome face lit up instantly. It was that same bright, crinkling smile I had fallen in love with 10 years ago. Looking at it now made me want to vomit. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, smoothly pocketing the device. "I am so sorry about that. The Peterson account is a complete disaster today. Did you get everything you needed from the aisles?" He reached out, pulled me gently against his chest, and pressed a soft, warm kiss to my forehead. His cologne smelled like expensive cedar and lies. "I decided to hold off," I managed to reply, my voice eerily steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I was not sure about the grout color anymore. Let us just go home." The drive back to our quiet suburban neighborhood usually took 40 minutes. That afternoon, it felt like 40 years. We merged onto the busy highway, and the rhythmic thrum of the tires against the asphalt became the deafening soundtrack to a brutal war raging inside my head. Every primitive instinct I possessed clawed desperately at my throat, begging me to scream, to shatter the suffocating quiet of the car. I wanted to grab the steering wheel, force the vehicle onto the gravel shoulder, and demand the name of the woman in the beige coat. I wanted to know the exact price tag he had placed on my career and my freedom. But my architectural brain, the logical, structural part of me that analyzed stress points and load-bearing walls for a living, screamed much louder. It warned me of imminent, catastrophic collapse. If I confronted him right then, he would deny everything, or worse, he would panic and accelerate his timeline. I was the chief architect. I held the absolute highest security clearance at Novus Archways. If those proprietary algorithms and classified structural designs leaked to a competitor, the board of directors would not look at Julian. They would look directly at me. I was the one who checked out the secure laptop. I was the one legally responsible for the data. The federal authorities would not see a heartbroken, betrayed wife. They would see a greedy corporate spy. I was not just facing a messy divorce and a division of assets. I was staring down the barrel of 20 years in a federal penitentiary for economic espionage. Julian was not just leaving me for another woman. He was meticulously framing me to take the fall for his treason. That night, our master bedroom felt like a sealed burial tomb. The digital clock on the wooden nightstand glowed a dull red, reading 2:15 in the morning. I lay perfectly still on my back, staring blindly up at the dark ceiling. Next to me, Julian was fast asleep. His chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm. Occasionally, he would shift his weight, his arm casually brushing against my hip as if seeking the familiar comfort of his wife. My skin crawled at his touch, every nerve ending screaming in revulsion. But I forced my muscles to remain entirely relaxed. I could not stiffen. I could not pull away. The sheer audacity of his peaceful rest was terrifying. How could a man orchestrate the complete destruction of his wife's life and then sleep so soundly I listened to his breathing, counting the agonizing seconds, and an absolute, freezing clarity washed over me. The man sleeping beside me was not my partner. He was a hostile threat occupying my space. He was a dangerous enemy agent sleeping in my bed. In the heavy darkness, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I would not shed a single tear. Tears were a luxury for women who had the safety to break down. I did not have that luxury. I decided then and there to construct a fortress of absolute silence. Silence was not an indicator of weakness or submission. In this new, horrifying reality, silence was my ultimate armor. It was the only tactical weapon I currently possessed. I needed time. I needed concrete evidence. And most importantly, I needed him to believe he was still the smartest person in the room. When the sun rose the next morning, Mila, the loving wife, was dead. But Julian did not know that yet. I got out of bed, tied my silk robe, and went downstairs to the kitchen. I ground his favorite dark roast coffee beans and brewed a flawless pot. When he walked in, stretching and rubbing his tired eyes, I handed him his steaming mug with a bright, cheerful smile. I kissed his cheek, a gesture that required every ounce of willpower I possessed, and casually complained about a fake, tedious board meeting I had scheduled for Monday. I chatted aimlessly about grocery lists and dinner plans. I became a masterful actress, wrapping myself in the perfect, impenetrable disguise of a busy, naive, and deeply devoted spouse. He sipped his coffee, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman smiling back at him was already sketching the blueprints for his destruction. My counter-investigation in the shadows had officially begun. The following Tuesday, During my lunch hour, I purchased an untraceable prepaid mobile phone from a dusty convenience store located 3 towns over. I paid in cash, a crisp $50 bill, and tossed the receipt into a public trash bin. My target was a man named Vance. He was a former military intelligence officer turned independent cybersecurity contractor. I knew of him through hushed whispers in the upper echelons of the tech industry. People hired Vance when they needed to find ghosts. I needed him to find a monster. Our communication was strictly encrypted. I sent him the date, time, and location of the hardware store incident, along with the make and model of my husband's car. I wired a non-refundable retainer of $10,000 from a secret emergency fund I had opened before my marriage, an account Julian knew absolutely nothing about. Then, the agonizing wait began. For 72 hours, I continued playing the role of the blissful wife. I cooked chicken parmesan, I ironed his favorite blue dress shirts, and I listened to him complain about his supposed grueling work schedule. Every time he touched my shoulder, my muscles screamed, but I forced my face to soften into a gentle smile. It was the most exhausting performance of my entire life. On Friday evening, while Julian was out at a supposed networking dinner, my burner phone buzzed. It was a secure link from Vance. I locked myself in my home office, closed the thick oak door, and opened the file. The first document was a high-resolution photograph. It was the woman in the beige trench coat from the parking lot. Her name was Chloe Sterling. According to Vance's detailed dossier, she was 28 years old and a senior venture capital broker for Zenith Dynamics. My blood ran completely cold. Zenith Dynamics was the single largest, most aggressive competitor to Novus Archways. They had been trying to beat us to the market with a new self-sustaining building material for over 3 years. Julian handing her my encrypted files was not just corporate theft. It was an industry-shifting act of treason. But as I scrolled down the screen, the true, sickening depth of the conspiracy began to unfold. Vance had dug far beyond a simple illicit love affair. He had tracked the digital footprints of Julian's recent financial activities. I expected to see secret wire transfers into Julian's personal bank accounts. I expected to find a hidden stash of payoff money. What I found was a chilling, perfectly constructed trap. Julian had not taken a single dime under his own name. Instead, Vance discovered a web of 3 separate offshore banking accounts located in the Cayman Islands. They were fully active, holding balances that totaled over $400,000 in initial deposits. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my hands trembling violently. The primary account holder listed on every single one of those offshore accounts was not Julian. It was me, Mila Clark. He had used my social security number, copies of my passport, and forged digital signatures to set up the entire offshore portfolio. Vance had managed to intercept the origin of the wire transfers. The massive sums of money funneling into these accounts were coming directly from shell corporations tied to Chloe Sterling and Zenith Dynamics. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I gasped, gripping the edge of my heavy wooden desk to stop myself from collapsing. The entire puzzle clicked into place, creating a picture so ugly and terrifying it defied human comprehension. Julian was not just selling my company's secrets to fund a new life with his mistress. If he simply divorced me, he would lose half of our massive joint estate, our stock options, and the multi-million-dollar house we had built together. Julian was far too greedy for a standard divorce. His plan was a masterclass in psychological and legal warfare. He and Chloe were going to use my stolen architectural algorithms to launch their own shadow corporation. Meanwhile, when the data breach at Novus Archways was inevitably discovered, the federal investigators would follow the money. They would bypass Julian completely and find a massive trail of bribes leading directly into offshore accounts registered under my exact name. He was going to frame me for selling out my own company. He was going to watch the FBI put me in handcuffs, drag me out of my office, and sentence me to decades in federal prison. And because I would be a convicted felon, he would smoothly claim the role of the devastated, betrayed husband. He would take every single penny of our marital assets, leaving me to rot in a concrete cell while he built an empire on my stolen genius. A sudden, violent wave of nausea surged up my throat. I clamped a hand over my mouth, shoved my chair backward, and sprinted down the hallway. I crashed into the guest bathroom, dropping to my knees against the cold porcelain of the toilet. I retched forcefully, dry heaving until my ribs ached and tears streamed down my face. My stomach twisted into tight, agonizing knots as the sheer, calculated cruelty of his betrayal poisoned my system. I had shared my bed, my dreams, and 10 years of my life with a man who was meticulously measuring me for a coffin. I stayed on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes, shivering uncontrollably as the last remnants of the woman I used to be were violently purged from my body. Then, the shivering stopped. I slowly pushed myself up off the floor. I walked over to the marble sink and turned on the cold water. I splashed my face once, twice, 3 times, washing away the sweat and the tears. I grabbed a white towel, dried my skin, and looked directly into the mirror. The naive, loving wife who had walked into that hardware store a week ago was completely gone. She had died on the bathroom floor. Staring back at me was a survivor. My sadness had evaporated, burned away by a cold, blinding rage. I felt an absolute, terrifying sense of calm settle over my mind. Julian thought he was a brilliant strategist. He thought he was playing a perfect game of chess against a blind opponent. He had no idea that I was the architect. I built structures designed to withstand earthquakes, hurricanes, and the test of time. I walked out of the bathroom, leaving the darkness behind. I was going to design a prison for my husband, and I was going to make sure the walls were entirely soundproof. The very next morning, I bypassed my usual design studio and took the private executive elevator directly to the top floor of Novus Archways. I did not walk into that building as a victim. I walked in as a commanding officer preparing for a brutal siege. Flanking my right side was Evelyn, my fiercely intelligent personal attorney, a woman who treated corporate litigation like a blood sport. Waiting for us behind the heavy, soundproof mahogany doors of the primary boardroom was Marcus, the chief executive officer of Novus Archways. I bypassed all the standard morning pleasantries. I simply opened my heavy leather briefcase and laid every single piece of evidence Vance had gathered directly across the polished glass table. I showed them the offshore accounts registered under my name, the forged digital signatures, the high-definition photographs of Chloe Sterling in the parking lot, and the undeniable, time-stamped proof of Julian physically stealing our proprietary algorithms. Marcus stared at the documents, the color draining from his face before being replaced by a dangerous, furious crimson. His first instinct was the most predictable one. He reached for his desk phone, fully prepared to bring the entire cyber division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation crashing through my front door before noon. "Wait," I commanded, placing my hand firmly over his wrist. "If we arrest Julian right now, we only catch a rogue, greedy husband. Zenith Dynamics will simply deny any knowledge of the transaction. They will claim Chloe Sterling was acting entirely independently. They will publicly fire her, and their corporation will escape completely unscathed. We need to let him complete the delivery. We need to catch Zenith Dynamics holding the stolen goods in a public, undeniable arena where they cannot hide." Marcus slowly lowered his phone, a predatory, calculating gleam replacing the initial shock in his eyes. Evelyn nodded in silent approval. We spent the next 4 hours locked in that room, drafting a massive corporate counteroffensive that would make the most seasoned military strategists weep with absolute joy. With the full, unlimited backing of the corporation, Evelyn went to work on the financial battlefield. Over the next 5 days, we executed a flawless, entirely silent liquidation of my tangible life. Because Julian was so fiercely focused on building his fake empire with Chloe and monitoring the illegal offshore accounts he had set up in my name, he entirely neglected our legitimate domestic assets, operating completely under the radar. Evelyn meticulously transferred my massive company stock portfolio, my private retirement funds, and the deed to our custom-built, $3 million suburban home into a complex series of impenetrable blind trusts. She structured them so securely that they required specialized biometric keys to access. Legally, the entity known as Mila Clark was rapidly becoming a financial ghost, holding exactly zero net worth on paper. If Julian ever tried to trigger his divorce plan and touch our shared accounts, he would find nothing but digital dust. I was methodically stripping the copper wire out from under the floorboards while he was busy admiring the expensive wallpaper. But the true masterpiece of my revenge required irresistible bait. I spent 3 sleepless nights down in the secure sub-basement of the Novus Archways research facility, crafting the ultimate technological trap. I built a massive data packet that I affectionately named the Trojan Horse. On the surface, the files were absolutely magnificent. I designed a revolutionary, self-sustaining structural blueprint utilizing kinetic energy absorption that looked like the absolute pinnacle of my entire career. It was a billion-dollar idea. It was exactly the kind of miracle technology Zenith Dynamics had been desperately trying to achieve for the past 3 years, but buried deep within the core architecture of the code, perfectly disguised as a standard structural integrity loop. I planted a highly aggressive, self-executing malware script. The moment those files were opened and compiled on an external network, the code would instantly trigger. It would not only wipe the host machine clean, but it would aggressively lock down the presentation network and broadcast a blaring, unclosable beacon straight to the federal authorities, pinging their exact location, their internet protocol address, and the registered identities of the machines involved. I brought the Trojan Horse home on a highly classified, heavily encrypted drive. On a quiet Thursday evening, while Julian was pouring himself a generous glass of expensive red wine in the kitchen, I casually left my laptop sitting wide open on the dining room table. "I am going to take a long, boiling hot shower," I announced, stretching my arms high over my head and letting out a convincing, exhausted yawn. My shoulder muscles are absolutely killing me from sitting hunched over that drafting desk all day. "Take all the time you need, my love," Julian replied smoothly, offering me a warm, deeply reassuring smile. "You work entirely too hard." I walked upstairs, turned the shower on full blast, and closed the heavy bathroom door. But I did not step into the water. I stood perfectly still on the plush bath mat, holding my breath, staring intently at the glowing screen of my prepaid burner phone. Vance had installed a silent, remote proximity alert on my laptop. 6 agonizing minutes later, the dark screen illuminated. A small text notification popped up, stating that a foreign universal serial bus drive had been physically inserted into my machine. The Trojan Horse had been successfully downloaded. He took the bait hook, line, and sinker. I finally stepped into the steaming water, washing my hair with a genuine, euphoric sense of absolute victory. An hour later, I was downstairs in the brightly lit kitchen, casually tossing a fresh garden salad while a prime rib roasted in the oven. Julian was sitting comfortably at the kitchen island, swirling his ruby red wine, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "You know, Mila," he said, staring at me with those lying, beautiful eyes that I used to trust with my life. "I really feel like this is going to be our best year yet. I can see an incredibly bright, wealthy future for us on the horizon." I placed a bright red cherry tomato on top of the salad, carefully wiping my hands on a pristine white kitchen towel. I looked right back at him, offering a smile so sweet and entirely hollow it could have shattered bulletproof glass. He truly thought he was the grand mastermind, flawlessly orchestrating my tragic, inevitable downfall. He had absolutely no idea he was nothing more than a dancing puppet, moving exactly where I pulled the invisible strings. "I completely agree, Julian," I replied softly, my voice dripping with manufactured devotion and perfect pitch. "I think you are about to get exactly what you deserve." It happened exactly 2 days later. Julian walked into our bedroom on a Tuesday evening, casually tossing his favorite leather duffel bag onto the mattress. He claimed a sudden, massive client emergency required his immediate presence in Chicago for the weekend. I knew the truth. This was not a client emergency. This was the final auction. He was flying out to pitch my stolen, supposedly revolutionary kinetic algorithms to a syndicate of incredibly wealthy, aggressive venture capitalists backed by Zenith Dynamics. I played the role of the dutiful, supportive wife one last time. I stood by the ironing board, meticulously pressing the collars of his expensive white dress shirts, while his back was turned, distracted by a baseball game on the television. I slid a tiny matte black microchip, a state-of-the-art global positioning system tracker, and high-definition audio transmitter provided by Vance, deep into the false bottom lining of his suitcase, securing it with a single drop of fabric glue. On Thursday morning, I kissed him goodbye at the front door. I told him to have a safe flight and to call me when he landed. The moment his silver sedan turned the corner and disappeared from view, the stopwatch in my head started ticking. I grabbed my pre-packed tactical bag and drove straight to a private airstrip on the outskirts of the city. I did not fly commercial. Waiting for me on the tarmac was a sleek, black corporate jet belonging to Novus Archways. Inside the luxurious cabin, I was greeted not by flight attendants, but by Marcus, my attorney Evelyn, Vance, and a specialized team of 4 federal agents wearing dark suits and grim expressions. The atmosphere inside that cabin was electric, humming with the lethal, focused energy of a military strike team preparing for a highly coordinated raid. The flight to Illinois took exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes, but my adrenaline was surging so violently it felt like a mere heartbeat. Julian and Chloe had rented the opulent, gold-leafed executive suite on the 42nd floor of the prestigious Grand Azure Hotel in downtown Chicago. They had booked the massive conference room Alpha for their illicit presentation. What they did not know was that our team had already secured conference room Beta, the space located immediately next door, sharing a massive, joined structural wall. The moment we arrived, Vance and the federal technicians went to work with terrifying speed and precision. This was a masterclass in modern surveillance. They used silent, diamond-tipped microdrills to punch microscopic holes through the thick plaster, threading fiber optic camera lenses no larger than a grain of sand directly into the molding of Julian's room. They attached high-frequency laser microphones to the adjoining glass panels, capable of picking up a whisper from 50 feet away. Within 30 minutes, our dark, windowless room was transformed into a high-tech command center, illuminated entirely by the cold, blue glow of 6 massive surveillance monitors. I sat rigidly in a rolling leather chair in the center of the darkness, staring unblinking at the primary screen. The audio feed crackled to life, filling our room with the sound of clinking crystal glasses and low, confident laughter. The camera angle provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the stage. I watched as Chloe Sterling, dressed in a sharp, intimidating crimson suit, paced excitedly near the front row. Julian walked up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, and pressed a deep, victorious kiss to her lips. It was a kiss celebrating their impending wealth, a kiss built entirely on my impending destruction. He then confidently stepped up to the polished wooden podium, flashing that same brilliant, charming smile he had used to deceive me for a decade. He began to speak, eloquently and persuasively selling my blood, my sweat, and my sleepless nights to the highest bidders in the room, seamlessly pushing me closer and closer to a federal prison cell with every single word. He outlined the fake kinetic energy absorption model flawlessly, boasting about its potential to dominate the global market. The investors, a row of 8 stern-faced, incredibly wealthy titans of industry, leaned forward in their chairs, clearly captivated by the stolen genius. Julian raised his hand, pointing a laser pointer at the blank projection screen behind him, ready to close the most lucrative, devastating deal of his entire life. But then, a sudden, unpredictable shift in the current occurred. The lead investor, a gray-haired, formidable man in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, held up his hand, abruptly halting Julian's perfectly rehearsed speech. "Words are cheap, Julian," the investor stated, his voice booming through our hidden audio feed. "We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. I do not want to see static slides. I want you to plug that drive in right now. I want you to run a live, real-time structural simulation of those blueprints on the main network. Show us that this miracle technology actually works." Julian's smile did not waver for a single second. He was entirely convinced of his own invincibility. "Of course, sir," he replied smoothly. "I would be absolutely delighted to show you the engine under the hood." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and produced the sleek metallic flash drive. He inserted it into the master laptop on the podium. On the massive projection screen behind him, the highly recognizable Novus Archways command prompt appeared. He confidently navigated to the execution file, completely unaware that he was standing on a digital landmine. "Prepare to witness the absolute future of structural engineering," Julian announced, pressing the enter key with a theatrical flourish. For exactly 3 seconds, a beautiful, incredibly complex, three-dimensional wireframe model began to render on the screen. The investors leaned in, their eyes wide with avarice. Then, the trap snapped shut. The wireframe model violently shattered into a million digital fragments. A piercing, high-pitched synthetic alarm erupted from the hotel audio system, deafening everyone in the room. The entire projection screen instantly shifted from a pristine white to a blinding, aggressive crimson red. Massive, bold black letters flashed across the display, completely illuminating Julian's stunned face. "Warning: stolen property belonging to Novus Archways Corporation. Malware deployed. This network has been seized. Internet protocol addresses and user identities are currently being logged and transmitted directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Total chaos erupted inside Conference Room Alpha. The wealthy investors bolted upright, knocking over crystal water glasses and leather chairs in their frantic haste to distance themselves from the podium. They were billionaires. Their greatest fear was federal implication. Chloe Sterling, the sharp, arrogant woman who had so confidently orchestrated this theft, instantly lost all color in her face. She looked at the flashing red screen, then looked at Julian, and her survival instincts kicked into maximum overdrive. "I have absolutely no idea what this is," Chloe shouted over the blaring alarm, rapidly backing away toward the exit. "I do not know this man. He approached our firm unsolicited. Zenith Dynamics has zero involvement in this. He is completely insane." Julian stood frozen behind the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. He stared frantically at his laptop, desperately mashing the keyboard, trying to abort the sequence. It was entirely useless. The machine was permanently locked down. That was my cue. I pushed open the door of our surveillance room and walked down the plushly carpeted hallway. I did not walk like a heartbroken, cheated wife. I walked like a conquering general. I was wearing a sharply tailored midnight blue power suit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. Flanking me on either side were 4 heavily armed federal agents and my brilliantly ruthless attorney, Evelyn. We reached the heavy oak double doors of Conference Room Alpha. I did not knock. The federal agents pushed the doors violently open, the loud crash echoing above the digital alarm. The entire room froze. Julian looked up from his useless laptop. When his eyes locked onto mine, the sheer, unadulterated terror that washed over his face was the most intensely satisfying sight I had ever witnessed. His confident, handsome mask completely dissolved, revealing the pathetic, cornered rat trembling underneath. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my gaze fixed entirely on him. The investors parted like the Red Sea, terrified of the federal agents securing the perimeter. I reached the polished wooden podium and looked down at my husband. He was sweating profusely, his expensive shirt clinging wetly to his chest. Without saying a single word, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 incredibly thick stacks of legal documents. I slammed the first stack onto the podium, right next to his frozen computer. "Those are our divorce papers," I stated, my voice echoing coldly through the sudden silence of the room. "Already signed by me." I slammed the second stack down, the sharp thud making him flinch violently. That is a federal court order freezing every single penny in those 3 Cayman Island offshore accounts you so foolishly opened using my name and my social security number. I continued, my tone absolute ice. Evelyn also made sure all of our legitimate domestic assets are safely locked away in a blind trust. You currently possess exactly $0 to your name. Julian's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of the podium to stop himself from collapsing onto the floor. I threw the final document down. It was a single, heavily stamped sheet of paper. And that, I whispered softly, leaning in close so only he could hear the absolute venom in my voice, is your federal arrest warrant for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and identity theft. 2 federal agents stepped forward, grabbing Julian roughly by the shoulders and pulling his arms behind his back. The distinct, heavy click of metal handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists was the sweetest symphony I had ever heard. Julian completely broke down. The sophisticated consultant vanished. Tears streamed down his face as he began to sob uncontrollably, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic whine. "Mila, please," he begged, struggling uselessly against the grip of the agents. "Mila, I am so sorry. It was a mistake. She made me do it. Please do not do this to me. Please, just talk to me." I stood perfectly still, looking at the pathetic, ruined man who had tried to build a fortune on my destruction. I offered him a slow, chilling smile. I stepped forward, leaning my face just an inch away from his ear. I let my voice drop into a soft, terrifyingly calm register. "Just a few minutes," I whispered, repeating the exact lie he had fed to me in the hardware store all those weeks ago. "It will all be over soon." I turned my back on him. I did not watch the agents physically drag him out of the conference room. I did not watch Chloe Sterling being cornered by a separate team of investigators who had just entered the hallway. I simply gathered my files, nodded to Evelyn, and walked out the door. I rode the glass elevator down 42 floors to the opulent hotel lobby. I pushed through the revolving brass doors and stepped out onto the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. I closed my eyes and took a massive, deep breath of the crisp, freezing city air. It tasted like absolute freedom. I did not shed a single tear for the 10 years I had lost, because I had not just saved my own life, I had methodically, perfectly buried the man who had tried to destroy me. I opened my eyes, looking up at the bright, clear sky. My future was finally mine again, and it looked absolutely magnificent. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible journey of betrayal and ultimate justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story empowering and thrilling, please help us keep the channel alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories that are simply too intense for public YouTube. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or click the Patreon link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Thank you again, and stay strong.